stark way of demonstrating that the considerations that must affect us in the nuclear age are rather different from those that have affected every previous generation of people and of political leaders.
The newspapers were quick to seize on Kinnock's confusion over defence, perhaps the most obvious policy pitfall. But tax was to follow. 5 days before polling, Roy Hattersley, the Deputy Leader and Shadow Chancellor, met Neil Kinnock for an emergency session. Some of Kinnock's pronouncements during television interviews had sown the seeds of confusion over tax policy. Hattersley was anxious to put things right.
I don't think Neil's attitude to policy was fundamentally different from mine. I think the difference between Neil and I was that he always felt a need to demonstrate how well he understood the policy. I remember saying to him, "It's better to be thought a stupid Prime Minister than a clever leader of the opposition. And sometimes we'll just have to let things hang in the air."
And this is why I think there's some confusion over Labour's policy towards taxation. In any way, he said.
Exactly what I said a moment ago.
Yes, so Mr. Gould said he couldn't make that guarantee.
But I'm sure it's good entertainment for Saturday night. But first you try to drive a wedge between me and Mr. Gould for saying one thing. Now you try to drive a wedge between Mr. Kinnock and me for saying what you now agree I said.
Mr. Hattersley,
it's all trivial stuff, Mr. Lewis. You ought to be in the entertainment business.
And if some Martin Lewis, whoever happens to be the commentator, gives us a hard time about it, well, we're like a boxer in a corner. We've just got to we've got to hide behind our hands. We can't risk punching him in a way which may enable somebody to knock us out later. Neil found it difficult to resist the temptation to demonstrate that he knew what was going on. And he always did know what was going on.
On the Monday before polling, the Labour Party held its final rally in Islington, North London. Labour had made Neil Kinnock the centre of the campaign. But his exuberant style was both his greatest asset and his Achilles heel. His enemies found him all too easy to attack.
The real case against Neil, enunciated by the right-wing press, was not that he was intellectually lightweight, which in my view was nonsense. It was a sort of educational and social snobbery. In the end, they could not quite see a Welsh working-class lad with speaking in a gruff, macho sort of Welsh lilt as Prime Minister. And in a way, and this is the sadness of it, in a way they may just about have been right. It's arguable, at any rate, that he could never quite deliver the appeal to that further margin, that extra 5% of the voters, who would always, in an English middle-class sense, I think always hold it against him that he was Welsh and working class.
Because I know what would have happened if I'd got words out of place, if I'd demonstrated more vitality, let's put it like that. Because, see, one person's mobilizing articulation is another person's windbaggery. And don't forget, I was the Welsh windbag.
Only 90 hours. 90 hours of Thatcherism to go.
I knew from the private polling as well as the published polling that we weren't going to win the election. I knew it, and I could also feel it. It was my judgment.
Good evening and welcome to election night. It's all over at last. The polling stations closed just a moment ago.
As the polls closed, some BBC journalists predicted a very close result.
When I got a call in my office at Walworth Road from Vincent Hanna, if I remember, saying to me in very sort of quiet and suggestive tones that things were really looking very, very good and that we could put Plan B into operation, I first of all didn't have the faintest idea what he meant by Plan B, and I politely pressed him and he said Buckingham Palace. And I thought that straight away that this is the sort of chap who, when he's not phoning you, is writing letters to you in green ink. And I asked him, thanked him for his trouble, but asked him not to pass all this on to Neil Kinnock. It wasn't fair, raising his hopes, which I knew would be dashed. Unfortunately, he ignored my advice, but it was fanciful.
At Walworth Road, the Labour Party headquarters, party workers and supporters were slow to face up to the magnitude of the defeat as the results came through. In 1987, a time of economic prosperity for many, Labour's preoccupation with poverty and unemployment seemed unappealing.
The electorate were actually travelling with Mrs. Thatcher. I mean, the majority of voters were actually going her way. They were going down what I saw as a kind of selfish, individualistic, non-caring path.
Margaret Hilda Thatcher, 21,000.
I thought that they were wrong and they would come back and see the error of their ways, but in fact they didn't. And what we had to do was find a new project which connected the aims and values of Labour with the aspirations of people, some of which were kind of Thatcherite aspirations.
Mrs. Thatcher won with a majority of 102. Labour had reduced her huge majority by a mere 42.
I think from 83 to 87, Neil was very alert to these changes that were happening in the political context. I think, however, he felt that they were to be negotiated in some way. I think he still felt a sense of obligation to those who'd elected him. He saw himself as coming from the left. He remained true to a lot of the principle, the doctrine that he'd grown up with. And it was only after 1987, when we still lost, that I think he seriously began to think that fundamental change was required.
You cannot have policies that, however appealing they are to you, are completely alien to very substantial sections of the population. And you cannot hope, simply with a flourish, that people will forget a deep-rooted memory they had of misconduct, division, and stupidity just a few years before.
The Rose had not brought victory. Labour was to remain in impotent opposition, while Margaret Thatcher continued with her mission, the destruction of socialism in Britain forever. Neil Kinnock, isolated in defeat and scarred by the experience of leadership, felt he had no alternative but to move with the tide of the times and take his party further to the right.
The fourth and final part of the Wilderness Years is tomorrow at 7:30.
For Christmas Day on BBC.